Welcome to Mystery at 221B, where Sherlock Holmes' secrets come to life.
In the fog-shrouded halls of Blackthorn Manor, a young woman vanishes without a trace, leaving behind a single ruby earring glinting like blood in the moonlight. Was it murder, abduction, or something far more sinister? Enter Sherlock Holmes, the brilliant Belgian detective, whose razor-sharp mind unravels a web of lies, hidden debts, and a deadly betrayal that threatens to tear a family apart. Why did Clara Vane defy a chilling threat to meet a shadowy figure at midnight? What secrets lie in the bloodstained scarf, the monogrammed glove, and a vial of tonic laced with danger? As clues twist and motives unravel, one question burns: who in this house of secrets would kill to keep the truth buried? Dive into Sherlock Holmes and the Blood-Red Specter, a classic mystery of suspense, deception, and a shocking reveal that will keep you guessing until the final page. Chapter 1. The Shadow over Blackthorn Manor. In the waning days of October, when the mists clung to the rolling hills of Kent like a widow's veil, Captain Arthur Hastings found himself once more in the company of his singular friend, Sherlock Holmes. The air was sharp with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, and the countryside, though beautiful in its autumnal decay, bore an air of quiet foreboding. Hastings, ever susceptible to the moods of the seasons, felt a shiver that was not entirely due to the chill as their hired carriage rattled along the narrow road toward Blackthorn Manor. The invitation had come unexpectedly, as such things often did with Sherlock Holmes. A letter, penned in a precise yet urgent hand, had arrived at their shared lodgings in London, summoning the detective to the estate of Sir Reginald Vane, a baronet of some repute whose family had long held sway in the region. The missive spoke of a matter most delicate and pressing, though it offered little in the way of detail. Sherlock Holmes, with his characteristic disdain for ambiguity, had nonetheless accepted the summons, his sharp gray eyes gleaming with that peculiar light that signaled the stirring of his remarkable intellect. "Really, Sherlock Holmes," Hastings remarked as the carriage jostled over a rut, "you might at least have shared what we're walking into. Sir Reginald's letter was as cryptic as a cipher." Sherlock Holmes, immaculate in his tailored overcoat, his small, precise hands folded neatly over the head of his cane, turned his head slightly to regard his friend. His moustache, meticulously groomed, twitched faintly with amusement. "My dear Hastings," he said in his clipped, faintly accented tones, "you mistake reticence for ignorance. The letter tells us much, though its pace with Sherlock Holmes's rapid deductions." "Well," he ventured, "I suppose it means he's in some sort of trouble, something he doesn't want the neighbors gossiping about." "Precisely," Sherlock Holmes said, his voice low and approving. "And trouble of a personal nature, one that threatens either his reputation or his peace. We shall see, mon ami. We shall see." The carriage drew to a halt before the imposing gates of Blackthorn Manor, a sprawling edifice of grey stone that seemed to rise from the earth like some ancient brooding sentinel. Its towers were wreathed in ivy, and its windows, though numerous, were dark, as if the house itself were reluctant to reveal its secrets. A footman, clad in sombre livery, opened the carriage door and led them through the gates, across a gravel drive, and into the great hall. The interior of Blackthorn Manor was as grand as it was oppressive. High ceilings soared above, adorned with intricate plasterwork, and the walls were lined with portraits of stern-faced Vanes, their eyes seeming to follow the visitors with silent accusation. A massive chandelier hung overhead, its candles unlit, casting the room in a dim, flickering glow from the fire that roared in the immense hearth. Sir Reginald Vane awaited them there, a tall, gaunt man in his late 50s, his face pale and drawn, his dark eyes darting nervously as he rose to greet them. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes," he said, his voice strained but courteous, "and Captain Hastings, I am most grateful for your prompt arrival. Please, be seated." Sherlock Holmes inclined his head courteously, though his eyes were already sweeping the room, noting every detail: the placement of the furniture, the faint scuff on the polished floor, the half-empty decanter of brandy on the sideboard. Hastings, accustomed to his friend's methods, took a seat beside him, his notebook at the ready. "I shall come to the point," Sir Reginald began, clasping his hands tightly before him. "Last night, a most dreadful event occurred within these walls. My niece, Miss Clara Vane, has vanished." Sherlock Holmes's expression remained impassive, though his eyes narrowed slightly. "Vanished, you say? Pray be precise, Sir Reginald. When was she last seen and by whom?" Sir Reginald swallowed hard, his fingers tightening until his knuckles whitened. "Clara dined with us yesterday evening. Myself, my wife, Lady Margaret, my son, Edmund, and our guests, Mr. and Mrs. Langley, and Dr. Percival Crane. She seemed in good spirits, though perhaps a touch distracted. After dinner, she retired to her room, as is her custom. This morning, her maid found her bed unslept in, her window open, and no trace of her anywhere." Hastings reached into his pocket and produced a small object, which he placed on the table before Sherlock Holmes. It was a single ruby earring, its deep red stone glinting like a drop of blood in the firelight. Sherlock Holmes took it up with delicate fingers, turning it this way and that, his eyes gleaming with interest. "Curious," he murmured. "And you are certain this belongs to Miss Clara?" "Without doubt," Sir Reginald said. "It was a gift from her late mother, my sister. She wore it always." Sherlock Holmes set the earring down and leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled before him. "Tell me of the household, Sir Reginald. Who resides here, and who was present last night?" Sir Reginald hesitated, then began. "There is myself and Lady Margaret, of course, our son, Edmund, who is 25 and recently returned from Oxford. Clara, my niece, who came to live with us after her parents' death 3 years ago. She is 22, a quiet girl, but with a sharp mind. Then there are the servants, Mrs. Harrow, the housekeeper, Ellen, Clara's maid, and a few others. Our guests last night were Mr. Charles Langley, a business associate, and his wife, Beatrice, who are staying for the week. Dr. Percival Crane, a physician and old friend, was also present." "And their relations with Miss Clara?" Sherlock Holmes asked, his tone deceptively mild. Sir Reginald shifted uncomfortably. "Clara was well-liked, I believe. Edmund was fond of her, though they sometimes quarrelled as cousins do. Lady Margaret treated her as a daughter, though Clara could be reserved. Mr. Langley had business dealings with her late father's estate, and Mrs. Langley was always kind. Dr. Crane, well, he took an interest in Clara's health, as she has been delicate since her parents' passing." Sherlock Holmes' eyes flickered with a sudden intensity. "Delicate, you say? In what way?" "She has suffered from nerves," Sir Reginald admitted. "Occasional fainting spells, sleeplessness. Dr. Crane prescribed a tonic, which seemed to help." Sherlock Holmes made a small, non-committal sound and rose to his feet. "I should like to see Miss Clara's room, if you please, and I shall require a list of everyone present last night, along with their movements after dinner. No detail is too small, Sir Reginald." The baronet nodded, his face a mask of anguish. "Of course, Monsieur Sherlock Holmes. Anything you need." As they followed Sir Reginald up the grand staircase, Hastings glanced at his friend. "What do you make of it, Sherlock Holmes? A disappearance, an earring, an open window. It's all rather theatrical, don't you think?" Sherlock Holmes' lips curved into a faint smile. Theatrical, perhaps, but not without purpose. The stage is set, Hastings, and the players are before us. But it is the little details, the earring, the window, the delicate health. Is more to this than a simple vanishing. They reached Clara's room, a spacious chamber adorned with delicate furnishings and a large window overlooking the darkened gardens. The bed was indeed untouched, the covers smooth and undisturbed. The window stood ajar, admitting a chill breeze that stirred the curtains. Sherlock Holmes moved with his usual precision, examining the floor, the window frame, the dressing table. He paused at the latter, his fingers brushing over a small vial of amber liquid. "A tonic," he murmured, holding it to the light. "Most interesting." Hastings watched, his curiosity piqued. "What do you see, Sherlock Holmes?" But Sherlock Holmes only smiled enigmatically. "I see, Hastings, the beginning of a puzzle, and I, Sherlock Holmes, shall solve it." Chapter 2. The Silent Cry. The morning light, pale and reluctant, filtered through the heavy drapes of Blackthorn Manor, casting long shadows across the polished floors. The household was awake, though an oppressive silence hung over the great house, as if the very walls held their breath in anticipation of some dread revelation. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the faithful chronicler of Sherlock Holmes's exploits, stood at the edge of the drawing-room, observing the assembled company with a mixture of curiosity and unease. The disappearance of Miss Clara Vane had cast a pall over Blackthorn Manor, and the air was thick with unspoken suspicions. Sherlock Holmes, however, was in his element. He stood before the great fireplace, his small, precise figure immaculate in a dark suit, his hands clasped behind his back. His grey eyes, sharp as a hawk's, moved from face to face, taking in every detail of the gathered party. Sir Reginald Vane, pale and haggard, his fingers twitching nervously. Lady Margaret, his wife, whose regal composure was marred by the faint tremor of her lips. Their son, Edmund, a handsome young man whose sullen expression suggested both grief and defiance. Mr. Charles Langley, a portly businessman with a florid complexion, who mopped his brow incessantly. His wife, Beatrice, a delicate woman whose eyes darted about as if seeking escape. And Dr. Percival Crane, a lean, scholarly figure whose calm demeanor seemed almost too perfect. "My friends," Sherlock Holmes began, his voice smooth and measured, with that faint Belgian accent that lent his words an air of authority. "We are gathered to address the most distressing matter of Miss Clara Vane's disappearance. I have examined her room, and I have questions. Each of you was present last night, and each of you, I trust, will assist me in uncovering the truth. Let us begin with the facts." Hastings, seated with his notebook open, scribbled diligently as Sherlock Holmes continued. "Miss Clara dined with you all at 8 o'clock. What was her demeanor during the meal?" Lady Margaret spoke first, her voice steady despite the strain in her eyes. "Clara was quiet, as she often is, spoke little, but she smiled at Edmund's jests and complimented the soup. I thought her perhaps a little distracted, but nothing out of the ordinary." Edmund Vane shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. "She was fine," he said curtly. "We talked about the new mare in the stables. Clara loves horses. She seemed herself." Sherlock Holmes's eyes lingered on Edmund for a moment before moving to Mr. Langley. "And you, monsieur? You had business with her late father's estate, I understand?" Langley cleared his throat, his handkerchief twisting in his hands. "Yes, well, I mentioned a matter concerning some investments her father had made. Clara was polite, but she said she'd rather discuss it another time. She seemed tired, perhaps." "Tired," Sherlock Holmes repeated softly, as if tasting the word. "And you, Mrs. Langley?" Beatrice Langley's hands fluttered to her necklace, a nervous gesture. "Oh, she was charming as always. We spoke of her needlework. She's quite skilled, you know. I didn't notice anything amiss." Dr. Crane, who had been silent thus far, leaned forward, his voice calm and precise. As her physician, I observed that Clara appeared in good health, though I noted a certain pallor. I suggested she take her tonic before retiring, as it helps with her nerves. Sherlock Holmes's moustache twitched faintly. The tonic, he said, producing the small amber vial from his pocket. This, I presume, found on her dressing table, half empty? You prescribed it, Doctor? Crane nodded, unperturbed. Indeed, a mild sedative to ease her sleeplessness. Perfectly harmless. Sherlock Holmes set the vial down with care, his expression unreadable. Let us proceed to the events after dinner. Miss Clara retired at what time? 9:30, Sir Reginald said promptly. She excused herself, saying she wished to read before bed. We all remained in the drawing room for cards and conversation until nearly 11. And no one saw her after she left the drawing room? Sherlock Holmes asked, his gaze sweeping the room. A chorus of murmured negatives followed, though Hastings noted that Edmund's eyes dropped to the floor and Mrs. Langley's fingers tightened on her necklace. Sherlock Holmes, of course, missed nothing. Very well, he said. I shall now require your movements after dinner, down to the smallest detail. Sir Reginald, if you please. Sir Reginald recounted his evening. Cards with Langley and Crane, a brief discussion with his wife about household matters, then retirement to his study until midnight. Lady Margaret confirmed she had played cards, then gone to her room to write letters. Edmund claimed to have lingered in the drawing room, then taken a walk in the gardens before bed. Langley and his wife said they had retired together shortly after 11, and Dr. Crane stated he had read in the library until half in silence, his eyes half closed, as if committing every word to memory. When the accounts were complete, he nodded. Thank you. I shall now inspect the grounds, particularly beneath Miss Clara's window. Hastings, you will accompany me. As they stepped into the crisp morning air, Hastings could not help but voice his thoughts.
Sherlock Holmes. They all seem so ordinary. No one admits to anything suspicious, yet Clara's gone. And that earring, surely it means something.
Sherlock Holmes's lips curved into a faint smile. Ordinary, Hastings? No, no. Each of them carries a secret, a small crack in their facade. The earring, the tonic, the distracted demeanor, these are the threads of our tapestry. Come, let us see what the grounds reveal. The window of Clara's room overlooked a secluded corner of the garden, where a gravel path wound beneath ancient yews. The ground below was soft from recent rain, and Sherlock Holmes knelt to examine it, his magnifying glass glinting in the weak sunlight. Here, he murmured, pointing to a faint impression in the earth. A footprint, Hastings, small, but not a woman's. A man's boot, narrow, with a distinctive heel. And here, he gestured to a patch of disturbed gravel. Something was dragged, or perhaps dropped. Hastings peered over his shoulder. A struggle, perhaps? Could someone have taken her? Sherlock Holmes rose, brushing dirt from his knees with fastidious care. Possible, but unlikely. The window is high, and the frame shows no signs of forced entry. No, Hastings. I suspect Miss Clara left of her own accord, or was lured. The earring suggests haste, not violence. They continued their inspection, Sherlock Holmes noting the angle of the window, the distance to the nearest door, and the state of the surrounding shrubs. As they returned to the house, a maid, Ellen, Clara's personal attendant, approached, her face pale and her hands wringing her apron.
Begging your pardon, sir,
she said to Sherlock Holmes, her voice trembling.
but I found something in Miss Clara's room this morning after you left. I didn't want to trouble Sir Reginald, but...
She produced a small, folded piece of paper, its edges crumpled. Sherlock Holmes took it with care, unfolding it to reveal a single line written in a hurried hand. "Meet me at midnight. The yew tree." Sherlock Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Most illuminating, Ellen. You were right to bring this to me. Tell me, did Miss Clara seem herself yesterday?" Ellen hesitated, glancing nervously at Hastings. She was quite— "Nerves? Curious, Hastings. Very curious." As they re-entered the house, Hastings felt a chill that had little to do with the autumn air. "Sherlock Holmes, do you think she's still alive?" Sherlock Holmes' expression was unreadable, but his voice was firm. "I think, Hastings, that Miss Clara Vane is at the heart of a puzzle far deeper than a simple disappearance. And I, Sherlock Holmes, shall unravel it." Chapter 3. The Arrival of Sherlock Holmes. The somber atmosphere of Blackthorn Manor seemed to deepen as the day progressed. The grey light of late morning yielding to a sky heavy with the promise of rain. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing by the tall windows of the drawing-room, watched the gathering clouds with a sense of unease that mirrored the tension within the house. The disappearance of Miss Clara Vane had unsettled the household, and the arrival of Sherlock Holmes, the famed Belgian detective, had only heightened the air of expectation and dread. Sherlock Holmes himself stood at the center of the room, his small, immaculate figure a study in calm authority. His grey eyes, sharp and unyielding, surveyed the assembled company with a precision that seemed to pierce through their carefully maintained facades. Sir Reginald Vane, Lady Margaret, Edmund, Mr. and Mrs. Langley, and Dr. Percival Crane were all present, their faces a mixture of curiosity, apprehension, and, in some cases, thinly veiled irritation. The local constable, a stout man named Inspector Grayson, had also arrived, his presence adding a layer of official scrutiny that seemed to chafe at the household's aristocratic sensibilities. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes," Inspector Grayson began, his tone gruff but respectful. "Sir Reginald has informed me of your involvement. I must say, I'm not accustomed to private detectives taking precedence in such matters, but your reputation precedes you. What have you learned thus far?" Sherlock Holmes inclined his head slightly, his mustache twitching with the faintest hint of amusement. "Inspector, I am but a humble consultant here at Sir Reginald's request. As for what I have learned, it is too early for conclusions, but rest assured, I have observed much. And the little grey cells, they are already at work." Hastings, seated with his notebook, suppressed a smile. He knew that tone. Sherlock Holmes was in his element, and the game, as he so often called it, was afoot. The detective turned to the assembled group, his voice smooth and deliberate. "I shall begin with a few questions, if you please. Each of you has provided an account of your movements last night, but I require precision. Let us revisit the timeline. Miss Clara retired at 9:30. What did each of you do immediately after?" Sir Reginald cleared his throat, his hands clasped tightly. "As I said, I played cards with Mr. Lang."
Margaret nodded. "I remained in the drawing room for a time, then went to my room to write letters. I was there by 10 o'clock, I believe." Edmund's voice was curt, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I stayed in the drawing room for a bit, then took a walk in the gardens. I was back in my room by 10:30. Mr. Langley mopped his brow, his discomfort evident. "Beatrice and I retired together shortly after 11. We were in our room preparing for bed." Dr. Crane's calm voice followed. "I read in the library until 11:30, then went to my room. I saw no one after leaving the drawing room." Sherlock Holmes's eyes lingered on each speaker as if weighing their words against some invisible scale. "And none of you heard or saw anything unusual? No sounds from Miss Clara's room? No footsteps in the hall?" A chorus of denials followed, though Hastings noted that Mrs. Langley's fingers tightened on her shawl and Edmund's jaw clenched almost imperceptibly. Sherlock Holmes, of course, noticed everything. He turned to Inspector Grayson. "And you, Inspector, have you examined the grounds?" Grayson nodded, producing a small notebook. "My men searched the area this morning. We found footprints beneath Miss Clara's window. A man's, by the look of them, though the rain has blurred the details. No sign of a ladder or any means of climbing to the window. We also found this." He held up a small muddy object, a man's glove, worn and stained, with a faint monogram embroidered on the cuff. Sherlock Holmes took the glove, examining it with his magnifying glass. "The monogram appears to be an E," he murmured. "Most interesting. And where was this found?" "Near the yew tree, about 20 yards from the window," Grayson replied. "We're having it cleaned to see if we can identify the owner." Sherlock Holmes handed the glove back, his expression unreadable. "Keep it safe, Inspector. It may yet speak to us. Now, I should like to see the yew tree myself." The group dispersed, with Grayson returning to his men and the household retreating to their respective corners of the manor. Sherlock Holmes and Hastings made their way to the gardens, where the ancient yew tree stood like a silent sentinel, its gnarled branches casting eerie shadows. The ground beneath was soft and disturbed, the gravel path nearby bearing signs of recent activity. Sherlock Holmes knelt, his fingers brushing the earth. "The footprints here match those beneath the window," he said, his voice low. "A man, size 9, with a slight limp. See how the right heel digs deeper. And here," he pointed to a small, glistening object half buried in the soil. It was a fragment of red glass, no larger than a thumbnail, its edges sharp and irregular. Hastings leaned closer. "A piece of jewellery, perhaps, or part of the earring." Sherlock Holmes shook his head. "Not the earring. This is different, thicker, less
refined. Perhaps from a lantern or a decorative object. We shall see." He pocketed the fragment and stood, his eyes scanning the surrounding area. "The note, Hastings. Meet me at midnight, the yew tree. Someone lured Miss Clara here, but for what purpose?" They returned to the house, where Sherlock Holmes requested a private audience with Ellen, the maid. She appeared nervous, her hands twisting in her apron as she stood before the detective in the library. "Ellen," Sherlock Holmes began, his tone gentle but firm, "you were close to Miss Clara. Did she confide in you about this meeting at the yew tree?" Ellen hesitated, her eyes darting to Hastings before returning to Sherlock Holmes.
"Not exactly, sir, but she was different yesterday. She kept looking out the window, like she was waiting for something. And she asked me to leave her alone after dinner, which wasn't like her. She usually liked me to brush her hair before bed."
"And the tonic?" Sherlock Holmes asked, holding up the amber vial. "You said she didn't take it last night. Was that unusual?" Ellen nodded.
"Yes, sir. She usually took it every night, on Dr. Crane's orders. But last night, she pushed it aside and said she didn't need it."
Sherlock Holmes' eyes gleamed. "Thank you, Ellen. You have been most helpful." As the maid left, Hastings turned to his friend. "Sherlock Holmes, what does it mean? Why would she refuse the tonic? And that note, do you think she was meeting someone in secret?" Sherlock Holmes steepled his fingers, his expression one of intense concentration. "The tonic, the note, the glove, the glass. These are pieces of a puzzle, Hastings. Miss Clara was not a woman given to whims. She was drawn to that yew tree, and I suspect she knew her visitor. But whether she went willingly or under duress, that is the question." He rose, adjusting his cuffs with meticulous care. "Come, Hastings. I wish to speak with young Edmund Vane. His walk in the gardens last night interests me greatly." They found Edmund in the billiard room, idly knocking balls across the table with a restless energy. He looked up as they entered, his handsome face clouded with suspicion. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes?" he said, his tone guarded. "Have you found her?" "Not yet," Sherlock Holmes replied, his voice smooth. "But I am curious, Monsieur Edmund. You walked in the gardens last night, near the time Miss Clara retired. Did you see anything unusual? A figure, perhaps, near the yew tree? Edmund's cue paused mid-strike, and for a moment, his eyes flickered with something, fear, perhaps, or guilt. No, he said quickly. It was dark. I saw nothing. Sherlock Holmes smiled faintly. Of course. Thank you, monsieur. As they left the billiard room, Hastings whispered, He's hiding something. Suspect that the shadow over Blackthorn Manor is far darker than a mere disappearance. Chapter 4. The questions deepen. The afternoon at Blackthorn Manor was cloaked in a drizzle that pattered softly against the tall windows, lending the great house an even greater air of melancholy. The disappearance of Miss Clara Vane had set the household on edge, and the presence of Sherlock Holmes, with his piercing gaze and relentless inquiries, only heightened the tension. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal companion, followed his friend through the labyrinthine corridors of the manor, his notebook filled with scribbled observations and a growing sense of unease. Sherlock Holmes, however, moved with the calm precision of a man who saw order where others saw chaos. His small, immaculate figure seemed almost to glide as he led Hastings to the library, a vast room lined with towering bookshelves and heavy oak furniture. The air was thick with the scent of leather and old paper, and a fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room. It was here that Sherlock Holmes had requested private interviews with each member of the household, and it was here that he now sat, his hands folded neatly, his gray eyes alert and unyielding. "We begin, Hastings," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "with a methodical unraveling of the truth. Each person in this house holds a piece of the puzzle, and it is through their words and their silences that we shall find Miss Clara." The first to be summoned was Lady Margaret Vane, whose regal bearing seemed slightly diminished by the strain of the past 24 hours. She entered the library with measured steps, her dark silk gown rustling softly, and took the seat opposite Sherlock Holmes. Her face, though composed, bore the faint lines of sleeplessness, and her hands rested stiffly in her lap. "Lady Margaret," Sherlock Holmes began, his tone courteous but probing, "you described Miss Clara as being like a daughter to you, yet I sense a certain reserve in your account of her. Was there any tension between you, however slight?" Lady Margaret's lips tightened briefly before she answered. "Clara was a dear girl, Monsieur Sherlock Holmes, but she could be willful. She had her mother's spirit, independent, sometimes to a fault. We occasionally differed on matters of propriety, but nothing serious." Sherlock Holmes' mustache twitched faintly. "Propriety, you say? Was there a particular incident that comes to mind?" Lady Margaret hesitated, her fingers brushing the lace at her cuff. "A small matter, perhaps. Clara had taken to corresponding with someone. A friend, she said, but she was secretive about it. I advised her to be more open, as such things can lead to gossip, but she assured me it was harmless." Sherlock Holmes leaned forward slightly, his eyes gleaming. "This correspondence, did you see the letters, or know the identity of her correspondent?" "No," Lady Margaret admitted. "She kept them locked in her writing desk. I respected her privacy." Sherlock Holmes nodded, making a mental note. "And last night, after dinner, you went to your room to write letters. Did you hear anything unusual? Footsteps, perhaps? Or a cry?" "Nothing," Lady Margaret said firmly. "The house was quiet." Sherlock Holmes dismissed her with a polite nod, and she left the room, her posture rigid. Hastings leaned closer. "She's hiding something, Sherlock Holmes. That business about the letters. Do you think Clara was involved in something scandalous?" "Patience, Hastings," Sherlock Holmes replied, his voice soft but firm. "The truth is like a fine wine. It must be savoured slowly. Let us speak with Mr. Langley next." Charles Langley entered, his florid face glistening with perspiration despite the coolness of the room. He sat heavily, his hands fidgeting with his watch chain. Sherlock Holmes regarded him with a calm intensity that seemed to unnerve the businessman. "Monsieur Langley," Sherlock Holmes began, "you mentioned discussing business with Miss Clara last night. What was the nature of this business?" Langley cleared his throat, his eyes darting to the side. "It was a minor matter concerning her father's estate. Some investments that needed her approval, nothing urgent." "Yet you chose to raise it at dinner," Sherlock Holmes said, his tone deceptively mild. "Why not in private, at a more suitable hour?" Langley's discomfort grew. "I thought it best to mention it casually. Clara was not one for formal meetings. She preferred to keep things light." Sherlock Holmes's eyes narrowed. "And her response? You said she seemed tired. Was there anything else? Anger, perhaps, or unease?" "She was polite," Langley said quickly. "Perhaps a bit distracted, as I said, but nothing more." Sherlock Holmes leaned back, his fingers steepled. "One last question, monsieur. Your movements after dinner. Did you leave the drawing room at any point before retiring?" Langley shook his head. "No, I stayed with Sir Reginald and Dr. Crane until we finished our game. Then Beatrice and I went to bed." Sherlock Holmes dismissed him, and as Langley left, Hastings whispered, "He's nervous, Sherlock Holmes. Did you see how he avoided your eyes?" "Indeed," Sherlock Holmes murmured. "The man perspires as if under a tropical sun. Let us see what Mrs. Langley reveals." Beatrice Langley entered next, her delicate frame swathed in a pale shawl. Her eyes, large and expressive, were red-rimmed, as if she had been crying. Sherlock Holmes's tone softened as he addressed her. "Madame, you—"
Perhaps she was unwell, but she assured me she was fine. "And after dinner?" Sherlock Holmes asked. "Did you see her again?" "No," Mrs. Langley said softly. "I stayed in the drawing room until Charles and I retired. I heard nothing unusual." Sherlock Holmes nodded, then produced the fragment of red glass he had found near the yew tree. "Does this mean anything to you, madame?" Mrs. Langley's eyes widened, and for a moment she seemed to falter. It looks like a piece of a lantern, perhaps. We have several in the guest wing, but I can't be sure." Sherlock Holmes pocketed the glass, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, madame. You have been most helpful." As she left, Hastings turned to Sherlock Holmes. "She recognized that glass. I'm sure of it. Why didn't you press her?" "Because, Hastings," Sherlock Holmes said, "sometimes the truth emerges more readily when the pressure is subtle. Let us conclude with Dr. Crane." Dr. Percival Crane entered with the calm assurance of a man accustomed to being respected. His lean frame and sharp features gave him an air of intellectual authority, and he met Sherlock Holmes' gaze without flinching. "Doctor," Sherlock Holmes began, "you prescribed a tonic for Miss Clara's nerves, yet last night she did not take it. Why might that be?" Crane's expression remained composed. "Clara was a sensitive young woman, prone to anxiety. The tonic was a mild sedative, as I said. If she chose not to take it, perhaps she felt she didn't need it that night." Sherlock Holmes' eyes gleamed. Or perhaps she suspected it was not what it seemed. "Tell me, doctor, what is in this tonic?" Crane's brow furrowed slightly. "A standard preparation, valerian, chamomile, and a trace of laudanum, perfectly safe." Sherlock Holmes produced the vial and held it to the light. "I shall have it analyzed, with your permission. And one final question. Where were you between 9:30 and midnight?" "In the library," Crane replied smoothly.
I read until 11:30, then retired. I saw no one. Sherlock Holmes dismissed him, and as the door closed, Hastings leaned forward. Sherlock Holmes, that tonic, do you think it's poisoned? Not poisoned, perhaps, Sherlock Holmes said, his voice low. But there is something amiss. The note, the glass, the glove, the untouched tonic. These are not random. They form a pattern, Hastings, and soon the little grey cells will reveal its shape. As they left the library, the rain began to fall in earnest, drumming against the manor's ancient walls. Hastings felt a chill, not from the weather, but from the grey walls. The disappearance of Miss Clara Vane had stirred the household into a state of restless suspicion, and the arrival of Sherlock Holmes, with his relentless scrutiny, had only deepened the tension. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever attentive to his friend's methods, followed Sherlock Holmes as they returned to the library, where the detective had requested a moment of solitude to reflect on the morning's interviews. Sherlock Holmes stood before the fire, his small, immaculate figure silhouetted against the flickering flames. His hands were clasped behind his back, and his grey eyes, sharp and contemplative, seemed to see beyond the room, as if tracing invisible threads of logic. Hastings, seated with his notebook, could not help but marvel at the contrast between the detective's calm exterior and the storm of deduction brewing within. "Hastings," Sherlock Holmes said at last, his voice low and precise, "we are surrounded by red herrings, carefully placed to mislead the unwary. The glove with the monogram E, the untouched tonic, the mysterious note, these are distractions, designed to obscure the truth. But the little grey cells, they are not so easily deceived." Hastings leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "You think someone is deliberately misleading us? But who? And why?" Sherlock Holmes's moustache twitched faintly, a sign of amusement or perhaps satisfaction. "That, mon ami, is the question. Let us consider the glove, found near the yew tree, bearing the initial E. The obvious conclusion is that it belongs to Edmund Vane, the sullen young man with a penchant for late-night walks. Too obvious, perhaps." "You suspect it's a plant?" Hastings asked, his eyes widening. "Precisely," Sherlock Holmes replied. "A glove is easily dropped, easily monogrammed. It points the finger at Edmund, but in doing so it shields another. We must look beyond the obvious, Hastings, to the subtle contradictions that betray the truth." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Grayson, his face flushed with excitement. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes," he said, brandishing a small evidence bag. "We found something new. One of my men discovered it in the stables, hidden in a bale of hay." He produced a delicate silk scarf, stained with mud, and what appeared to be a faint smear of blood. The scarf was embroidered with the initials CV, Clara Vane. Sherlock Holmes took it with care, examining it under the light of a nearby lamp. His fingers traced the fabric, noting the texture, the stains, the faint scent of lavender that clung to it. "Most intriguing," he murmured. "Found in the stables, you say, and no one saw Miss Clara there last night?" Grayson shook his head. "The stable boy says the Does it say? As Grayson left, Hastings turned to his friend. "Blood, Sherlock Holmes. That's no red herring. It suggests foul play, doesn't it?" "Perhaps," Sherlock Holmes said, his tone cautious. "But blood can be staged, Hastings, just as a glove can be planted. The scarf was hidden, yet not so well that it could not be found. We must proceed with care." Determined to follow this new lead, Sherlock Holmes led Hastings to the stables, a sturdy stone building, a short walk from the manor. The air inside was thick with the scent of hay and horses, and the stable boy, a lanky youth named Tom, stood nervously as Sherlock Holmes questioned him. "You are certain the stables were locked after 9?" Sherlock Holmes asked, his eyes fixed on the boy's face. "Yes, sir," Tom replied, his voice trembling slightly. "I locked the door myself. No one could have got in without a key." "And yet," Sherlock Holmes said, holding up the scarf, "this was found here. Tell me, Tom, did you see Miss Clara at all yesterday?" Tom's eyes widened, and he shook his head vigorously. "No, sir. Miss Clara loved the horses, but she didn't come to the stables yesterday. I'd have seen her." Sherlock Holmes nodded, his expression unreadable. He examined the area where the scarf had been found, a corner piled with hay bales. His magnifying glass revealed a few strands of dark hair caught in the rough wood of a nearby beam, hair that matched the description of Clara's. "Interesting," he murmured, pocketing the strands. "Very interesting." As they returned to the manor, Hastings could not contain his curiosity. Sherlock Holmes, the scarf, the blood, the hair, it all points to something sinister. "Do you think Clara was attacked in the stables?" Sherlock Holmes paused, his hand resting on the manor's heavy oak door. "The evidence suggests a struggle, Hastings, but it is too neat, too convenient. The scarf was hidden, yet found. The blood is present, yet minimal. The hair is Clara's, yet placed where it could not be missed. Someone wishes us to believe in violence, but I suspect a different story." Back in the library, Sherlock Holmes requested a private word with Edmund Vane. The young man entered with a scowl, his hands thrust into his pockets. "What now, Monsieur Sherlock Holmes?" he asked, his tone bordering on insolence. "I've told you all I know." Sherlock Holmes regarded him calmly. "Monsieur Edmund, the glove found near the yew tree bears the initial E. Is it yours?" Edmund's face paled, but he recovered quickly. "Walked in the gardens. I didn't go near the stables. That scarf isn't mine, and I don't know how it got there." Sherlock Holmes leaned forward, his voice soft but piercing. "And yet, monsieur, you were fond of your cousin. Did you ever meet her in secret, perhaps by the yew tree?" Edmund's jaw tightened, and for a moment it seemed he might refuse to answer. "We were close," he said at last, his voice low. "But I didn't meet her last night, I swear it." Sherlock Holmes dismissed him, and as Edmund left, Hastings whispered, "He's lying, Sherlock Holmes. He knows more than he's saying." "Perhaps," Sherlock Holmes replied, his eyes half closed. "But lies, Hastings, are as revealing as truths. The glove points to Edmund, the scarf to violence, yet both feel staged. We must look deeper into the motives, the secrets, the contradictions." As the rain continued to fall, Sherlock Holmes turned to the window, his mind clearly racing. The tonic, the note, the glass, the glove, the scarf. These are the pieces of our puzzle. But it is the human heart, Hastings, that holds the key. Someone in this house knows what happened to Clara Vane, and I, Sherlock Holmes, shall uncover their secret. The day drew to a close, with no sign of Clara, and the manor seemed to grow darker, as if the shadows themselves were conspiring to hide the truth. Hastings felt a chill, not from the rain, but from the growing certainty that the mystery was far from solved, and that the red herrings were only the beginning. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The rain had ceased by evening, leaving Blackthorn Manor shrouded in a damp, heavy mist that clung to the stone walls and seeped into the very air. The household, though outwardly composed, was a cauldron of unspoken fears and suspicions, each member retreating to their private corners as if to shield their secrets from Sherlock Holmes's unrelenting scrutiny. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the faithful observer, felt the weight of the mystery pressing upon him. Yet he knew that his friend, the meticulous Belgian detective, thrived in such an atmosphere of intrigue. Sherlock Holmes stood in the library, his small, precise figure illuminated by the soft glow of a single lamp. On the table before him lay the artifacts of the case: the ruby earring, the amber vial of tonic, the crumpled note, the monogrammed glove, the silk scarf with its faint blood stain, and the fragment of red glass. He examined each with the care of a jeweler, appraising a rare gem, his grey eyes gleaming with the intensity of a mind fully engaged.
Violence, don't they? Sherlock Holmes' moustache twitched faintly. They suggest what someone wishes us to believe, Hastings, but observe. He held up the scarf, turning it in the lamplight. The blood is minimal, a mere smear, and it is dry, though the scarf was found in damp hay. This suggests it was stained before it was hidden. And the hair we found in the stables, Clara's, yes, but placed too conveniently, caught on a beam where it would be seen. You think it's all staged? Hastings asked, his brow furrowing. I think, Sherlock Holmes replied, that we are being led down a path, but not the one that leads to the truth. Come, let us revisit Miss Clara's room. There is a detail there that troubles me. They made their way through the silent corridors of the manor, the flickering light of their lamp casting eerie shadows on the walls. Clara's room was as they had left it, the bed untouched, the window still ajar, the air heavy with a scent of lavender and rain. Sherlock Holmes moved with purpose, his magnifying glass in hand, examining the floor, the furniture, the window frame. He paused at the dressing table, where the amber vial of tonic stood, and then turned his attention to the small writing desk in the corner. The maid, Ellen, mentioned that Clara was secretive about her correspondence, Sherlock Holmes said, his fingers brushing the desk's polished surface. Lady Margaret confirmed this. Let us see what secrets this desk holds. He opened the desk's drawer with care, revealing a neat stack of stationery, a few pens, and a small locked diary bound in dark leather. Sherlock Holmes produced a slender tool from his pocket and, with a deft movement, picked the lock. The diary opened to reveal pages filled with Clara's elegant handwriting, but it was a single entry dated the previous day that caught his attention. Listen, Hastings, Sherlock Holmes said, reading aloud. October 25th. I cannot shake this unease. He insists we meet, but I fear his intentions. The yew tree, midnight. I must know the truth, though it may cost me dearly. Hastings' eyes widened. She was afraid, Sherlock Holmes. She knew something, or someone, was dangerous. Indeed, Sherlock Holmes murmured, closing the diary. But who is he? The note suggests a meeting, and her fear suggests coercion. Yet she went willingly, or so it appears. He turned to the window, his gaze fixed on the darkened garden beyond. There is another detail here, Hastings, one I overlooked earlier. He knelt by the window, his magnifying glass hovering over the sill. Here, he said, pointing to a faint scratch in the wood, barely visible in the dim light. A mark, fresh and precise, as if made by a tool, a knife perhaps, or a metal clasp. And here, he gestured to a tiny thread of dark fabric caught in the splintered wood. This is not from Clara's clothing, which Ellen described as pale silk last night. This is coarser, darker, perhaps from a man's coat. Hastings leaned closer, his excitement mounting. A clue, Sherlock Holmes. Someone climbed in or out through this window. Or wished us to think so, Sherlock Holmes said,
rising with a faint smile. The scratch is too deliberate, the thread too conveniently placed, but it tells us something of the mind behind this charade. They returned to the library, where Sherlock Holmes laid the diary and the thread beside the other clues. "We have a pattern, Hastings," he said. "The note, the scarf, the glove, the glass, the diary, the thread, all point to a narrative of abduction or violence. Yet each is too perfect, too staged. Someone is playing a game, and they underestimate Sherlock Holmes." Their discussion was interrupted by a knock at the door. Mrs. Harrow, the housekeeper, entered, her face pale and her hands clasped tightly. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes," she said, her voice trembling, "I've something to tell you. I didn't want to speak before with everyone listening, but I saw something last night." Sherlock Holmes' eyes gleamed. "Speak, Madame Harrow. No detail is too small." The housekeeper took a deep breath. "It was near midnight. I was in the servants' hall, checking the linens, when I heard a noise outside, a sort of rustling, like someone moving through the bushes. I looked out and saw a figure near the yew tree, holding a lantern. It was too dark to see their face, but they were tall, and they wore a dark coat. I thought it might be Mr. Edmund, but I couldn't be sure." "And did you see Miss Clara?" Sherlock Holmes asked. Mrs. Harrow shook her head. "No, sir, just the figure. They stood there a moment, then moved toward the stables. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now—" Sherlock Holmes nodded, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Madame Harrow. You have done well to tell me." As the housekeeper left, Hastings turned to his friend. "A figure with a lantern. That explains the red glass, doesn't it? And the dark coat. Could it be the same fabric as the thread?" "Possibly," Sherlock Holmes said, his voice thoughtful. "But we must not leap to conclusions. The lantern, the figure, the thread. These are pieces, but the picture is not yet clear. Let us consider Dr. Crane's tonic once more. Its presence, untouched, suggests Clara suspected something. I have sent it to a chemist in London for analysis. The results may tell us much." As night fell, the manor seemed to grow quieter, the mist outside thickening into a shroud that obscured the gardens. Sherlock Holmes stood by the window, his silhouette sharp against the lamplight. "The little grey cells, Hastings. They are working. This case is a tapestry of deception, woven with care. But there is a loose thread, and I shall find it." Hastings felt a chill. The mystery was deepening. The clues were mounting, yet each seemed to point in a different direction, and the truth about Clara Vane's disappearance remained tantalizingly out of reach. "What now, Sherlock Holmes?" he asked. "Now," Sherlock Holmes replied, his eyes gleaming, "we watch, we listen, and we wait. The guilty will betray themselves, Hastings, through the smallest detail, and I, Sherlock Holmes, shall be there to see it." Chapter 7. More Lies Surface. The mist that enveloped Blackthorn Manor had thickened into a dense fog by the evening, wrapping the ancient estate in an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional drip of water from the eaves. The disappearance of Miss Clara Vane had cast a shadow over the household, and the air was heavy with secrets, each member of the manor guarding their own truths behind carefully composed facades. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever vigilant, felt the weight of the mystery pressing upon him, but Sherlock Holmes, with his unerring precision, seemed to draw energy from the very complexity of the puzzle. In the library, where the fire cast a warm but flickering glow, Sherlock Holmes stood before the table of clues, his small, immaculate figure radiating quiet intensity. The ruby earring, the amber vial, the crumpled note, the monogrammed glove, the blood-stained scarf, the fragment of red glass, the diary entry, and the dark thread from the windowsill lay before him, each item a silent witness to the unfolding drama. Hastings, seated with his notebook, watched as his friend's grey eyes moved from one object to another, his mind clearly weaving connections invisible to all but himself. "Hastings," Sherlock Holmes said, his voice low and deliberate. "We are approaching a critical juncture. The clues are many, but they are clouded by deception. The lies of this household are beginning to surface, like ripples on a still pond disturbed by a hidden stone. We must probe deeper to the motives that lie beneath." Before Hastings could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. Inspector Grayson entered, his face grim. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes, we've had a development. One of the maids overheard a conversation this afternoon, something that might interest you." Sherlock Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Send her in, Inspector. Every whisper in this house is a potential key." The maid, a young woman named Sarah, entered nervously, her hands twisting in her apron. "Begging your pardon, sir," she said, her voice trembling, "but I heard something I shouldn't have. It was Mr. Langley and Dr. Crane in the conservatory just after luncheon. They didn't know I was there, tending to the plants." "Go on," Sherlock Holmes said, his tone gentle but commanding. "What did you hear?" "Sarah, it was all taken care of, and that no one would suspect. I didn't hear more. They moved away, but it sounded wrong, sir." Sherlock Holmes nodded, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Sarah. You have done well to come forward." As the maid left, Hastings turned to his friend, his eyes wide. "Sherlock Holmes? That sounds like a conspiracy. Debts, handling Clara. Do you think Langley and Crane are involved in her disappearance?" "It is possible," Sherlock Holmes said, his fingers steepled. "But we must not rush to judgment. The words handle Clara are ambiguous. They could mean many things. A financial dispute, perhaps, tied to her father's estate, or something darker. Let us speak with Mr. Langley." Charles Langley was summoned, his florid face even more flushed than usual as he entered the library. He mopped his brow with a handkerchief, his eyes darting nervously between Sherlock Holmes and Hastings. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes," he said, his voice strained, "what is this about? I've told you everything I know." "Not everything, Monsieur Langley," Sherlock Holmes said, his tone deceptively mild. "You were overheard this afternoon, speaking with Dr. Crane about debts unpaid and handling Clara. What did you mean by this?" Langley's face paled, and he stammered. I don't know what you're talking about. I spoke to Crane about business, nothing more." "Debts?" "Yes. There were matters concerning Clara's father's estate, but nothing untoward." Sherlock Holmes leaned forward, his eyes piercing. "And yet you spoke of handling Miss Clara. A curious phrase, monsieur. Explain it." Langley's hands trembled, and he sank into a chair. "It was nothing sinister, I swear. Clara's father left some investments in my care, stocks, bonds, that sort of thing. They've not performed well, and Clara was pressing me for answers. I asked Crane to speak with her, to reassure her that all was in hand. That's all." Sherlock Holmes' moustache twitched faintly. "And this conversation took place in the conservatory, where you thought yourselves alone?" Langley nodded, his discomfort palpable. "Yes, but it was nothing more than that. I swear it on my honor." Sherlock Holmes dismissed him with a nod, and as Langley left, Hastings whispered, "He's lying, Sherlock Holmes. Or at least not telling the whole truth. That business about reassuring Clara, it doesn't ring true." "Indeed," Sherlock Holmes said softly. "His fear betrays him. But let us not focus solely on Langley. There is another thread to pull, Edmund Vane." Edmund was summoned next, his sullen demeanor unchanged.
Was the nature of these disagreements? Edmund's jaw tightened. Nothing serious. Family matters. Clara could be stubborn. She had ideas about her future that my parents didn't approve of. Such as? Sherlock Holmes pressed. Edmund hesitated, then said, She wanted to travel, to study abroad. Father thought it improper for a young woman. They argued about it last week. Sherlock Holmes's eyes narrowed. And you? Did you share your father's views? I didn't care, Edmund said sharply. Clara could do what she liked. She was like a sister to me. His voice faltered, and for a moment his composure cracked, revealing a flicker of genuine emotion. Sherlock Holmes noted it, but pressed on. And this correspondence she kept secret, did she ever mention it to you? Edmund shook his head, but his eyes flicked away, a telltale sign. No, she didn't. Sherlock Holmes dismissed him. And as Edmund left, Hastings leaned closer. He's hiding something, Sherlock Holmes. That look. He knows about those letters. Undoubtedly, Sherlock Holmes said. But his pain is real, Hastings. He cares for Clara, yet he conceals something. A lover, perhaps, or a rival? We shall see. As the evening deepened, Sherlock Holmes requested a private word with Dr. Crane. The physician entered with his usual calm, his lean face composed, but there was a wariness in his eyes that had not been there before. Doctor, Sherlock Holmes began, you were overheard discussing Miss Clara with Mr. Langley. You spoke of handling her. What did you mean? Crane's expression remained steady. A misunderstanding, Monsieur Sherlock Holmes. Langley was concerned about Clara's inquiries into her father's estate. I offered to speak with her, to ease her mind. My role as her physician gave me some influence. And yet, Sherlock Holmes said, holding up the amber vial, she did not take your tonic last night. Why might that be? Crane shrugged lightly. She may have felt better, or simply forgotten. Patients are not always consistent. Sherlock Holmes's eyes gleamed. Or perhaps she suspected it was not what it seemed. I await the chemist's analysis, Doctor. It will tell us much. Crane's composure flickered, but he recovered quickly. I have nothing to hide, monsieur. The tonic is harmless. As Crane left, Hastings turned to Sherlock Holmes. They're all lying, aren't they? Langley, Edmund, Crane, each one has something to hide. Not lying, Hastings, Sherlock Holmes said, his voice soft. Concealing. Each guards a piece of the truth, and it is in their contradictions that we shall find Clara Vane. The fog outside is thick, but the fog of this mystery is Truth. Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The fog that enveloped Blackthorn Manor had grown denser as night fell, wrapping the estate in a shroud that seemed to mirror the tangled web of secrets within its walls. The disappearance of Miss Clara Vane had strained the nerves of the household, and the relentless probing of Sherlock Holmes had begun to unravel the carefully maintained composure of its inhabitants. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the steadfast chronicler, felt the weight of the mystery pressing heavily upon him, yet he could sense that a turning point was near, a moment when the truth, long suppressed, would begin to break through the surface. In the drawing room, where the fire cast a warm but flickering light, the household gathered for dinner, though the atmosphere was far from convivial. Sir Reginald Vane sat at the head of the table, his face pale and drawn, his eyes darting nervously to the empty chair where Clara had sat only 2 nights before. Lady Margaret maintained her regal poise, but her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her wine-glass. Edmund Vane, sullen and withdrawn, picked at his food, his gaze fixed on his plate. Mr. and Mrs. Langley sat close together, their faces betraying a shared anxiety, while Dr. Percival Crane, ever composed, sipped his soup with an air of detached calm. Inspector Grayson, invited to join the meal to discuss progress, sat uncomfortably, his presence a reminder of the official scrutiny hanging over the manor. Sherlock Holmes, seated opposite Sir Reginald, observed the scene with his characteristic intensity, his gray eyes moving from face to face, as if reading an open book. Hastings, at his side,
noted the tension in the room, the unspoken accusations that seemed to hover in the air like the fog outside. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes," Sir Reginald said at last, his voice strained, "have you made any progress? The uncertainty is unbearable. Clara, she is like a daughter to us." Sherlock Holmes set down his spoon with deliberate care, his expression unreadable. "Progress, Sir Reginald, is a matter of perspective. The little grey cells, they are at work, piecing together the puzzle. But I require honesty from all of you. The smallest omission, the slightest falsehood, delays the truth." A heavy silence followed, broken only by the clink of silverware. Then, to everyone's surprise, Beatrice Langley let out a soft sob, her hands flying to her face. "Oh, I can't bear it any longer," she cried, her voice trembling with emotion. "Clara, she wasn't just distracted that night, she was afraid. I saw it in her eyes, and I said nothing." The room froze, all eyes turning to Mrs. Langley. Her husband reached for her hand, his face pale. "Beatrice, my dear, calm yourself." "No," she said, pulling away. "I should have spoken sooner. During dinner, Clara
Napkin, and I saw her hands shaking. I thought it was her nerves, but now I think she knew something was wrong." Sherlock Holmes leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with interest. "Madam Langley, this is most significant. Did she say anything to suggest what she feared?" Mrs. Langley shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No, but she mentioned a letter. She said it had upset her, but she wouldn't say more. I should have pressed her, but I didn't want to intrude." Sherlock Holmes' moustache twitched faintly. "A letter, you say? Most illuminating. And where was this conversation?" "In the drawing room before dinner," Mrs. Langley replied. "We were alone for a moment before the others joined us." The room erupted in murmurs, and Hastings noted the reactions. Sir Reginald's face tightened. Lady Margaret's eyes narrowed. Edmund's fork clattered to his plate, and Dr. Crane's calm faltered for a fraction of a second. Sherlock Holmes, however, remained serene, his mind clearly racing. "Thank you, madam," he said. "Your candour is a step towards the truth. Let us now consider this letter. Who else knew of it?" No one spoke, but the silence was heavy with implication. Lady Margaret, her voice cool, said, "Clara was private about her correspondence. I mentioned it to you, Monsieur Sherlock Holmes, but I knew no details." Edmund's voice was sharp. "She never told me about any letter. If she was afraid, she hid it well." Sherlock Holmes turned to Dr. Crane. "And you, Doctor? As her physician, did Miss Clara confide in you about this fear, or this letter?" Crane's expression was steady, but his fingers tightened on his glass. "She mentioned no letter to me. As for fear, her nerves were delicate, as I've said. I attributed her unease to her condition." Sherlock Holmes nodded, his eyes never leaving Crane's face. "Very well. I shall need to see this letter, if it exists. Sir Reginald, may I have access to Miss Clara's writing desk once more?" "Of course," Sir Reginald said, his voice hoarse. "Anything you need." Dinner concluded in strained silence, and Sherlock Holmes and Hastings returned to Clara's room, accompanied by Sir Reginald. The writing desk yielded no new letters, but Sherlock Holmes examined the diary again, his fingers tracing the entry about the midnight meeting. "This fear Mrs. Langley speaks of," he murmured. "It aligns with Clara's words here. I must know the truth, though it may cost me dearly. She was drawn to that yew tree, Hastings, but by whom and why?" As they descended the staircase, they were met by Ellen, the maid, her face pale and her eyes wide with alarm. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes," she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder, "I found something else in Miss Clara's room, hidden."
Unfolded it to reveal a brief message in a bold, unfamiliar hand. "You cannot hide from me. The yew tree, midnight, or all will be lost." Hastings gasped. "A threat, Sherlock Holmes? Someone was coercing her." Sherlock Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Indeed, Hastings. This note changes everything. It is not a request, but a demand. And yet, Clara went to the yew tree, knowing the risk. Why?" They returned to the library, where Sherlock Holmes placed the new note beside the first. "Two notes," he said softly, "one in her hand, one in another's. Both speak of the yew tree, but one is a plea, the other a threat. The puzzle grows clearer, Hastings, but also more dangerous." As the fog pressed against the windows, Hastings felt a chill. "Sherlock Holmes, do you think Clara is still alive?" Sherlock Holmes' expression was grave. "I think, Hastings, that Clara Vane was caught in a web of secrets. Secrets that someone in this house will kill to protect. Mrs. Langley's outburst has cracked the facade, but the truth lies deeper still." He turned to the table of clues, his fingers brushing the blood-stained scarf. "Tomorrow we shall tighten the net. The guilty cannot hide forever, not from Sherlock Holmes." The fire flickered, casting shadows that seemed to dance with the specters of the manor's secrets. Hastings knew that the emotional turning point had come, but the mystery was far from solved, and the truth about Clara Vane remained shrouded in the fog. Chapter 9. The Trap. The fog that had cloaked Blackthorn Manor through the night lingered into the morning, lending the estate an air of otherworldly isolation. The household, already strained by the disappearance of Miss Clara Vane, seemed to teeter on the edge of collapse, the weight of Sherlock Holmes's relentless inquiries pressing upon every nerve. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal observer, sensed that the mystery was nearing a critical juncture, where the subtle threads of deception would either unravel or tighten into a noose. Sherlock Holmes stood in the library, his small, immaculate figure radiating a quiet intensity that belied the storm of deduction within. The table before him was a silent testament to the case. The ruby earring, the amber vial, the two notes, one in Clara's hand, one a threatening demand, the monogrammed glove, the blood-stained scarf, the red glass fragment, the diary, and the dark thread from the windowsill. Each item, meticulously arranged, seemed to pulse with hidden meaning, and Sherlock Holmes's gray eyes gleamed as he surveyed them. "Hastings," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "we have reached the moment to set a trap. The guilty party or parties grow restless. Mrs. Langley's outburst last night has shaken them, and the second note, with its threat, reveals a mind driven by desperation. We must apply pressure, mon ami, and watch who falters." Hastings leaned forward, his notebook open. "A trap, Sherlock Holmes? How do you propose to do that?" Sherlock Holmes's mustache twitched with a faint smile. "By gathering the household and presenting a version of the truth, close enough to provoke, but incomplete enough to draw out the guilty. They will betray themselves, Hastings, through a word, a glance, a gesture. The little gray cells, they are ready." The detective sent word through Sir Reginald, requesting that the entire household, family, guests, and key servants assemble in the drawing room that evening. As the hour approached, the air in Blackthorn Manor grew thick with anticipation, the fog outside seeming to seep into the very walls. Hastings, seated near the fire, watched as the group gathered, Sir Reginald, pale and haggard, Lady Margaret, her composure a brittle mask, Edmund, sullen and tense, Mr. and Mrs. Langley, clinging to each other with nervous glances, Dr. Percival Crane, calm but watchful, and Mrs. Harrow and Ellen, the maids, standing uneasily at the edge of the room. Inspector Grayson, his notebook in hand, stood by the door, the subtle contradictions that reveal the truth. "Tonight, I shall share what I know and what I suspect." A murmur rippled through the room, and Hastings noted the reactions. Sir Reginald's hands clenched, Lady Margaret's eyes narrowed, Edmund's jaw tightened, and Mrs. Langley stifled a gasp. Sherlock Holmes continued, undeterred. "Let us begin with the facts," he said, producing the crumpled note in Clara's hand. "Miss Clara was summoned to the yew tree at midnight, as this note in her own writing attests. She was afraid, as her diary reveals, yet she went. Why? Because she sought the truth, though she feared its cost." He held up the second note, the threatening one. This, however, was not written by Clara. It demands her presence at the yew tree, with a warning: "You cannot hide from me." Someone in this house lured her there, perhaps with coercion, perhaps with deceit. Edmund's voice cut through the silence. "You're accusing one of us? That's absurd. Clara could have left on her own. She was headstrong." Sherlock Holmes' eyes gleamed. "Headstrong, yes, but not reckless, Monsieur Edmund. Let us consider the other clues. A ruby earring, found near the window, suggests haste. A blood-stained scarf, hidden in the stables, suggests violence. A glove with the initial E, found near the yew tree, points to you, Monsieur Edmund. Yet these clues are too convenient, too staged. Someone wishes us to believe in a crime of passion or abduction." Lady Margaret's voice was sharp. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes, are you suggesting this is all a fabrication, that Clara is alive?" Sherlock Holmes turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I suggest, madame, that the truth is complex. Let us consider the tonic, prescribed by Dr. Crane, which Clara did not take that night. Why? Because she suspected it was not what it seemed. I've received word from my chemist in London. The tonic contains not only valerian and chamomile, but a trace of belladonna, a dangerous substance, if misjudged." Dr. Crane's calm faltered, his face paling. "That is preposterous. The tonic was harmless, a standard preparation." "Was it, Doctor?" Sherlock Holmes asked, his voice soft but piercing. "Or did you have reason to keep Clara compliant, perhaps to prevent her from asking questions about her father's estate?" Mr. Langley rose, his face flushed. "This is outrageous. You're accusing us of what? Poisoning her? Clara was like family to us." Sherlock Holmes held up a hand. "Calm yourself, Monsieur Langley. I accuse no one, yet. But your conversation with Dr. Crane, overheard in the conservatory, spoke of handling Clara and debts unpaid. What debts, monsieur? And why did they require such secrecy?" Langley sank back.
He swallowed hard, his voice barely audible. "It was a business matter. Clara's father left debts, large ones, that I covered to protect the family's name. Clara found out and was asking questions. I didn't want her to know the extent of it. I asked Crane to keep her calm, to dissuade her from digging further." Sherlock Holmes's eyes narrowed. "And the belladonna, Monsieur Langley, was that part of keeping her calm?" "I knew nothing of that," Langley protested. "I swear it!" Dr. Crane's voice was steady, but his hands betrayed a slight tremor. "The tonic was safe. Any belladonna was in trace amounts. A common sedative. I would never harm Clara." Sherlock Holmes turned to the group, his voice rising slightly. "And yet, someone did. The scarf, the glove, the notes. These are the work of a mind seeking to mislead. But there is one detail that cannot be staged. The human heart. Someone in this room knows what happened to Clara Vane, and I, Sherlock Holmes, shall find them." The tension in the room was palpable, a taut string ready to snap. Then, to everyone's shock, Ellen, the maid, stepped forward, her face pale but resolute. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes," she said, her voice trembling, "I can't keep silent any longer. I saw something else that night, something I didn't tell you before." Sherlock Holmes's eyes locked under hers. "Speak, Ellen. The truth, now." Ellen took a deep breath.
After I heard the rustling by the yew tree, I went to the window in the servants' hall. I saw two figures, not one. The first was tall, in a dark coat, holding a lantern. The second, it was Miss Clara. She was arguing with the other figure, her voice low but angry. I couldn't hear the words, but she pushed them away and ran toward the stables. The figure followed her. A gasp rippled through the room. Hastings' heart raced. Sherlock Holmes. She was alive. But who was the other figure? Sherlock Holmes's expression was grim. That, Hastings, is the question. Ellen, could you identify this figure? Ellen shook her head, tears in her eyes. It was too dark, sir. But they were tall, and the lantern cast a red light. The room erupted in murmurs, and Sherlock Holmes raised a hand for silence. Enough. The trap is set, and the guilty are uneasy. Tomorrow, we shall unravel the final threads. For now, I bid you good night. As the household dispersed, Hastings turned to his friend. Sherlock Holmes, you've stirred them up. Do you know who it is? Sherlock Holmes's eyes gleamed in the firelight. I suspect, Hastings. The little gray cells, they see the pattern. But we must wait for the final piece to fall into place. The fog outside seemed to press closer, and Hastings felt a chill, knowing that the trap had been sprung, and the truth was closer than ever. The reveal. The morning sun struggled to pierce the fog, a pale, ghostly light over the estate. The household was in a state of restless anticipation, the events of the previous evening's confrontation having left nerves frayed and secrets teetering on the edge of exposure. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal chronicler, felt his heart pound with the certainty that the mystery of Miss Clara Vane's disappearance was about to unravel. Sherlock Holmes, with his unerring precision, had set his trap, and now the moment of truth had arrived. In the grand drawing room, the household gathered once more, their faces a mixture of dread, curiosity, and defiance. Sir Reginald Vane sat rigidly at the head of the room, his hands clasped tightly. Lady Margaret's composure was a fragile veneer, her eyes darting nervously. Edmund Vane slouched in his chair, his sullen demeanour tinged with unease. Mr. and Mrs. Langley sat close together, their faces pale, while Dr. Percival Crane maintained his calm, though his fingers betrayed a slight tremor. Inspector Grayson stood by the door, his notebook ready, and the maids, Mrs. Harrow and Ellen, hovered at the edges, their presence a silent reminder of the secrets they had shared. Sherlock Holmes stood before the fireplace, his small, immaculate figure commanding the room with an authority that silenced all murmurs. His grey eyes gleamed with the intensity of a mind that had pieced together the final fragments of the puzzle. In his hands, he held the blood-stained scarf and the threatening note, their presence a stark accusation. "My friends," Sherlock Holmes began, his voice smooth and accented, "we have come to the end of this mystery. The disappearance of Miss Clara Vane has cast a shadow over Blackthorn Manor, but the little grey cells, they have worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. Let us now reconstruct what happened, step by step, and reveal the one who sought to deceive us all." A heavy silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Hastings, seated with his notebook, felt his pulse quicken as Sherlock Holmes continued. "Miss Clara Vane," he said, "was summoned to the yew tree at midnight by this note." He held up the threatening message. "You cannot hide from me. The yew tree, midnight, or all will be lost." This was not a request, but a demand, written in a bold hand that does not match Clara's. She went, as her diary attests, driven by a need to know the truth, though she feared the cost. Ellen, the maid, saw her there, arguing with a tall figure in a dark coat, illuminated by a red lantern.
Sherlock struggled, but the blood was dry, applied before it was hidden. The glove, marked with an E, points to Monsieur Edmund, but it is too convenient, too easily found. Edmund's face flushed, and he half rose from his chair. "You're saying I'm being framed? I told you I didn't see Clara that night." Sherlock Holmes raised a hand for silence. "Patience, monsieur. The glove was indeed a plant, but not to frame you, rather to distract us from the true culprit. Let us consider the tonic prescribed by Dr. Crane, which Clara refused that night. The chemist's analysis revealed a trace of belladonna, a dangerous substance if misused. Why would Clara, a woman of sharp intellect, refuse it?" Dr. Crane's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed unease. "As I said, Monsieur Sherlock Holmes, the tonic was harmless. A trace of belladonna is standard in such preparations." "Perhaps," Sherlock Holmes said, his tone deceptively mild. But Clara suspected otherwise. She was asking questions about her father's estate, about debts covered by Monsieur Langley. She was a threat to someone's carefully guarded secret. Mr. Langley's face paled, and he stammered. "I told you it was just business. I covered her father's debts to protect the family." Sherlock Holmes' eyes gleamed. "Indeed, Monsieur Langley. But your conversation with Dr. Crane, overheard in the conservatory, spoke of handling Clara. And the red glass fragment found near the yew tree matches the lanterns in the guest wing where you and Madame Langley reside. A curious coincidence, no?" Mrs. Langley gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Charles, no! You didn't—" "Silence, Beatrice!" Langley snapped, his voice hoarse. "I did nothing wrong." Sherlock Holmes turned to the group, his voice rising with quiet authority. "Let us reconstruct the night of October the 25th. Clara received a threatening note demanding she meet at the yew tree. She went, driven by her need to uncover a truth about her father's estate. A truth that threatened someone in this room. She argued with a figure in a dark coat, seen by Ellen. That figure was not Edmund, nor Sir Reginald, nor Mr. Langley. It was you, Dr. Crane." The room erupted in gasps, and Crane's calm shattered, his face paling. "This is absurd. I was in the library until 11:30, as I told you." Sherlock Holmes held up the dark thread. "This, found on the windowsill, matches the fabric of your overcoat, Doctor. The scratch on the sill, made by your pocketknife, suggests you climbed to Clara's room to plant the earring, creating the illusion." Sherlock Holmes's smile was cold. "Proof, Doctor. The proof is in your actions. You were Clara's physician, trusted with her care, but you were also her father's friend, and his creditor. When Clara began questioning the estate's finances, you feared exposure. You lured her to the yew tree, intending to frighten her into silence. But Clara, brave and resolute, confronted you. In a moment of panic, you struck her, and she fell, striking her head. The blood on the scarf was hers, but the injury was not fatal." A cry escaped Mrs. Langley, and Sir Reginald's face was ashen. "Clara! Is she alive?" he whispered. Sherlock Holmes nodded. "She is, Sir Reginald." After the altercation, Dr. Crane, realizing his error, hid her in the stables, unconscious but alive,
intending to move her later. The scarf and glove were planted to suggest a different narrative. But Clara is in the locked tack room, where I found her this morning, tended by Tom, the stable boy, who was sworn to secrecy by Dr. Crane. The room exploded in chaos. Crane lunged toward the door, but Inspector Grayson seized him, his face grim. "You're not going anywhere, Doctor." Sherlock Holmes raised a hand for silence. "Clara is safe, though weak. She will recover, and her testimony will confirm the truth." Dr. Crane, your motive was greed, your method deception. But your mistake was underestimating the little grey selves of Sherlock Holmes. As Crane was led away, the household dissolved into tears and exclamations of relief. Hastings turned to his friend, his voice awed. "Sherlock Holmes, how did you know?" Sherlock Holmes's eyes gleamed. "The details, Hastings, the contradictions in the clues, the fear in Crane's eyes, the pattern of deceit. The truth always reveals itself to those who observe." The fog outside began to lift, and Blackthorn Manor seemed to breathe again, freed from the spectre of its secrets. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The fog that had clung so stubbornly to Blackthorn Manor had at last begun to dissipate, revealing a sky of pale blue streaked with wisps of cloud. The revelation of Miss Clara Vane's survival and Dr. Percival Crane's guilt had lifted the oppressive weight from the household, though the air remained heavy with the aftershocks of betrayal. The great estate, so recently a prison of secrets, seemed to breathe anew, its ancient walls no longer suffocating, but merely silent witnesses to the drama that had unfolded. Captain Arthur Hastings sat in the library, his notebook open but subdued, grappling with the knowledge that a trusted friend had orchestrated such a deception. Sherlock Holmes stood by the window, his small, immaculate figure framed against the morning light. His hands were clasped behind his back, his grey eyes fixed in the gardens beyond, where the yew tree stood as a sombre reminder of the night's events. His expression was one of quiet satisfaction, tempered by the reflective mood that often followed the resolution of a case. "Hastings," he said at last, his voice low and precise, "the affair of the Blood-Red Specter, as you might call it, is concluded. Yet there is always a moment after the truth is revealed to reflect on the nature of human folly. It is a study as fascinating as the mystery itself." Hastings looked up, his honest face creased with curiosity. "Sherlock Holmes, you were remarkable last night. The way you pieced it all together, the tonic, the notes, the red glass, it was like watching a puzzle solve itself. But how did you know Clara was in the stables, and that Crane was the culprit?" Sherlock Holmes turned, his moustache twitching with a faint smile. "The little grey cells, mon ami, they see what others overlook. Let us review the path to the truth, for it is in the method that the lesson lies." He moved to the table where the clues still lay, though their significance had now been laid bare. The ruby earring, the blood-stained scarf, the monogrammed glove, these were the work of a mind seeking to mislead. Dr. Crane crafted a narrative of violence, hoping to divert suspicion to Edmund or an unknown intruder. But the clues were too perfect, Hastings. A true crime leaves chaos. A stage one leaves order disguised as chaos. Hastings nodded, scribbling in his notebook. "The glove with the E, that was meant to point to Edmund, wasn't it?" "Precisely," Sherlock Holmes said. "But it was too convenient, found too easily near the yew tree. The scarf, with its dry blood,
suggested a struggle, but the blood was applied before it was hidden in the damp hay. The red glass fragment from a lantern in the guest wing betrayed Crane's presence at the yew tree, as did the thread from his coat on the windowsill. These were not accidents, Hastings, but errors born of overconfidence. "And the tonic?" Hastings asked. "The belladonna, that was the key, wasn't it?" Sherlock Holmes's eyes gleamed. The tonic was the heart of the deception. Clara, a woman of sharp intellect, suspected it was more than a sedative. Her refusal to take it on the night of her disappearance was no coincidence. She feared Crane's intentions. The chemist's analysis confirmed the presence of belladonna, a substance
Threatening one. "A clever touch," Sherlock Holmes said. The note in Clara's hand, "Meet me at midnight, the yew tree," was her own, written in fear and resolve. The threatening note, however, was Crane's, designed to coerce her to the meeting. He underestimated her courage. She confronted him, and in his panic he struck her, causing a minor injury. Fearing exposure, he hid her in the stables, intending to move her later, and enlisted the stable boy, Tom, with a promise of reward or threat of harm. Hastings leaned back, his mind racing. "But how did you find her, Sherlock Holmes? You said you discovered her in the stables before the confrontation." Sherlock Holmes' smile was enigmatic. "A simple matter of observation, Hastings. The stables were locked, yet the hay was disturbed, and a faint scent of lavender, Clara's perfume, lingered near the tackroom. I examined it early yesterday, while you were speaking with Inspector Grayson. Clara was there, unconscious but alive, hidden behind a pile of blankets. Tom, loyal but frightened, admitted to guarding her under Crane's orders." Hastings shook his head in awe. "It's extraordinary, Sherlock Holmes. But why did Crane know it? Greed, you said? But what drove him to such lengths?" Sherlock Holmes turned back to the window, his voice softening. "Greed, yes, but also fear. Dr. Crane was not merely Clara's physician. He was her father's confidant and creditor. When Clara began questioning the estate's finances, she uncovered discrepancies, debts that Crane had manipulated to his advantage. Her inquiries threatened his reputation and his fortune. He sought to silence her, first with the tonic, then with intimidation. When that failed, he resorted to violence, though not murder. His plan was to spirit her away, perhaps to claim she had fled in disgrace. But he underestimated her resilience and my method." Hastings closed his notebook, his voice quiet. "And Clara? Will she recover?" "She will," Sherlock Holmes said. "Her injury was superficial, and her spirit is strong. She will confirm the truth when she is able, but the evidence is sufficient. Crane's fate is sealed." The library door opened, and Sir Reginald entered, his face weary but relieved. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Clara is awake. She's weak, but she asked for you. She wishes to thank you." Sherlock Holmes inclined his head. "I shall see her shortly. For now, Sir Reginald, tend to your family. The wounds of betrayal heal slowly, but they do heal." As Sir Reginald left, Hastings turned to his friend. "You've done it again, Sherlock Holmes. You've brought light to the darkness. But what now?" Sherlock Holmes adjusted his cuffs with meticulous care, his expression serene. "Now, Hastings, we depart. The case is solved, the truth revealed. Blackthorn Manor will find its peace, and I, Sherlock Holmes, return to my little grey cells, awaiting the next puzzle." They gathered their belongings and stepped into the crisp morning air, the fog now a mere memory. As their carriage rolled away from the manor, Hastings glanced back at the towering stone edifice, its secrets laid bare. "You know, Sherlock Holmes," he said, "I think this case will stay with me, the Blood-Red Specter. It's a story for the ages." Sherlock Holmes's eyes twinkled. "Then write it, mon ami, but do not embellish. The truth, in its simplicity, is drama enough." The carriage rattled on, carrying them back to London, where new mysteries awaited
and the legend of Sherlock Holmes grew ever brighter. Chapter 12. The Echoes of Truth. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Blackthorn Manor, casting a soft glow over the ancient stone walls, now free from the oppressive fog that had lingered for days. The resolution of Miss Clara Vane's disappearance had brought a tentative peace to the household, though the scars of betrayal lingered in the air like the faint scent of lavender that still clung to Clara's room. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the faithful companion, sat in the drawing-room, his notebook open but his pen idle, his thoughts consumed by the extraordinary events of the past days and the genius of his friend, Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes himself stood by the fireplace, his small, immaculate figure a picture of calm reflection. His grey eyes, sharp and contemplative, seemed to see beyond the room as if tracing the final threads of the mystery that had unravelled so dramatically the previous evening. The household, though relieved by Clara's safe return and Dr. Crane's apprehension, was subdued, grappling with the revelations that had shaken their trust in one another. "Hastings," Sherlock Holmes said, his voice low and precise, "the case is concluded, yet the echoes of truth linger. Each mystery leaves its mark, not only on those involved, but on those who unravel it. We must now ensure that Clara's recovery is complete and that justice is served." Hastings looked up, his honest face creased with concern. "Sherlock Holmes, do you think Clara will be able to face what happened? To know that Dr. Crane, someone she trusted, betrayed her so terribly, it must be a heavy burden." Sherlock Holmes' moustache twitched faintly, a sign of his thoughtful mood. "Clara Vane is a woman of remarkable strength, Hastings. Her courage in confronting Crane at the yew tree, despite her fear, speaks to her character. She will heal, though the heart takes longer than the body to mend." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sir Reginald Vane, his face still pale, but softened by relief. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes," he said, his voice steady but emotional, "Clara wishes to speak with you. She's stronger today, and she—" "Of course, Sir Reginald, lead the way." They ascended the grand staircase, Hastings trailing behind, his notebook tucked under his arm. Clara's room was bright with morning light, the window now closed, the air fresh and free of the chill that had marked their first visit. Clara sat propped against pillows, her face pale but her eyes clear, a faint smile playing on her lips as she saw Sherlock Holmes. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes," she said, her voice soft but steady, "I owe you my life. They tell me you found me in the stables, that you saw through Dr. Crane's deception. I don't know how to thank you." Sherlock Holmes took a seat beside her, his expression gentle but authoritative. "Mademoiselle Clara, your gratitude is appreciated, but it is the truth that matters. Tell me, if you are able, what happened that night at the yew tree?" Clara's hands tightened on the blanket, but she nodded. "I received a note, threatening, demanding I meet at the yew tree at midnight. I knew it was from Dr. Crane. He'd been pressing me to stop asking about my father's estate, saying it was for my own good. But I found papers in father's old desk, letters showing that Crane had siphoned funds covered by false debts. I confronted him, and he grew angry. We argued, and he struck me. I fell, and that's all I remember until I woke in the stables." Sherlock Holmes's eyes gleamed. "And the tonic, mademoiselle, why did you refuse it that night?" Clara's expression hardened. "I suspected it was more than a sedative. It made me feel foggy, unlike myself. I stopped taking it a week ago, and my mind cleared. That's when I found the papers." Sherlock Holmes nodded, his fingers steepled. "Your instincts were correct, mademoiselle. The tonic contained belladonna, a subtle poison meant to keep you compliant. Your refusal saved you from a deeper deception." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she held her composure. "I trusted him. He was my father's friend." Sherlock Holmes's voice was soft but firm. "Trust, when misplaced,
is a dangerous thing, mademoiselle, but you are safe now, and Dr. Crane will face justice." As they left Clara's room, Hastings turned to his friend. "Sherlock Holmes, her story confirms everything. But what of the others? Langley, Edmund, Lady Margaret. Were they involved?" Sherlock Holmes paused on the staircase, his expression thoughtful. Langley's role was peripheral. He covered debts to protect his own interests, but he did not orchestrate the crime. Edmund's secrecy stemmed from loyalty to Clara. He knew of her inquiries but kept silent to protect her. Lady Margaret suspected Crane's influence but lacked proof. Their lies were those of omission, not malice. Crane acted alone, driven by greed and fear of exposure. They returned to the drawing room, where Inspector Grayson awaited them, his face grim but satisfied. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes," he said, "Crane has confessed. Not to everything, mind you. He claims the blow was an accident, but he admits to hiding Clara and planting the clues. He's being taken to London for trial." Sherlock Holmes nodded. "Good work, Inspector. The evidence is incontrovertible. The tonic, the notes, the red glass, the thread. Justice will be served." Grayson hesitated, then added, "Clara's testimony will seal his fate. She's strong, that one. She's already talking of taking control of her father's estate to right Crane's wrongs." Sherlock Holmes's eyes twinkled. "A fitting resolution, Inspector. The truth, once revealed, empowers those who seek it." As Grayson left to oversee Crane's transport, Hastings turned to Sherlock Holmes. "What now, Sherlock Holmes? The case is solved. Clara is safe and Crane is in custody. Do we return to London?" Sherlock Holmes adjusted his cuffs with meticulous care, his expression serene. "Soon, Hastings. But first, I wish to walk the gardens one last time. There is a symmetry in concluding a case where it began, beneath the yew tree." They stepped into the crisp morning air, the gardens now bathed in sunlight, the yew tree standing tall and silent. Sherlock Holmes paused beneath its branches, his eyes tracing the path to the stables. "The human heart, Hastings," he said softly, "is a complex thing. Greed, fear, loyalty, courage, they drive us to acts both noble and vile. It is in understanding these motives that we find the truth." Hastings nodded, his voice quiet. "You saw it all, Sherlock Holmes. The motives, the contradictions, the truth hidden in plain sight. I'll never understand how you do it." Sherlock Holmes smiled faintly. "The little grey cells, mon ami. They see what others miss. Come, let us return to London. The world is full of puzzles, and I, Sherlock Holmes, am never idle for long." As they walked back to the manor to collect their belongings, Hastings glanced at the yew tree, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. The blood-red specter was no more, but its echoes would linger in his memory, a testament to the brilliance of Sherlock Holmes and the enduring power of truth. Chapter 13. The Ties That Bind. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Blackthorn Manor, its golden rays softening the stark outlines of the ancient estate. The revelation of Dr. Percival Crane's treachery and the safe return of Miss Clara Vane had brought a fragile calm to the household, yet the undercurrents of emotion, relief, guilt, and lingering mistrust still rippled beneath the surface. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the chronicler of Sherlock Holmes's triumphs, sat in the drawing-room, his notebook
bathed in sunlight. His hands were clasped behind his back, his grey eyes fixed on the gardens where the yew tree stood as a silent witness to the drama that had unfolded. His expression was one of quiet contemplation, a man who had unraveled the puzzle but now considered its broader implications. "Hastings," he said, his voice low and precise. "A case such as this
It is not merely about the crime, but about the ties that bind. Family, loyalty, betrayal. These are the threads that weave the human heart, and they are as complex as any mystery. Hastings looked up, his pen poised. "You're right, Sherlock Holmes. The Vanes, the Langleys, even poor Ellen, they've all been shaken by this. Clara's safe, but the trust they had in Crane, it's gone. How do they move forward?" Sherlock Holmes's mustache twitched faintly, a sign of his reflective mood. "They move forward, mon ami, by facing the truth, however painful. Clara Vane, with her courage and resolve, will lead the way. But let us visit her once more, to ensure her strength holds and to learn what she plans for the future." They made their way to Clara's room, where the young woman sat by the window, a shawl draped over her shoulders. Her face, though still pale, bore a determined expression, and her eyes, clear and bright, met Sherlock Holmes's with gratitude and resolve. A tray of tea and biscuits sat untouched on the table beside her, a sign of her lingering fragility. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes," she said, her voice steady, "and Captain Hastings, I cannot thank you enough. You've given me back my life, and more, you've given me the truth." Sherlock Holmes inclined his head, taking a seat opposite her. "Mademoiselle Clara, the truth is its own reward, but your courage made it possible. Tell me, how do you fare, and what are your intentions now?" Clara's hands tightened on the shawl, but her voice was firm. "I'm stronger each day, thanks to the new physician. As for my intentions, I mean to take control of my father's estate. Dr. Crane's deceit, those false debts he created, stole more than money. They stole my father's legacy. I'll see it restored, for his sake and mine." Sherlock Holmes's eyes gleamed with approval. "A noble pursuit, mademoiselle. And the papers you found, they will aid you in this?" Clara nodded. "I've kept them safe. They show how Crane manipulated the accounts, siphoning funds through false loans. I'll present them to the solicitors in London. Sir Reginald has promised—"
Leaned forward, his tone gentle but probing. "And Edmund, your cousin. He knew of your inquiries, yet kept silent. Have you spoken with him?" Clara's expression softened. "Edmund came to me this morning. He was ashamed, Monsieur Sherlock Holmes. He knew I was digging into the estate, but he thought it was a private matter, something I'd handle on my own. He didn't know about Crane's threats until it was too late. We've made our peace. He's like a brother to me." Sherlock Holmes nodded, his fingers steepled. "And the Langleys? Their role in covering the debts, did it trouble you?" Clara's eyes hardened briefly. "Mr. Langley acted out of self-interest, not malice. He covered the debts to protect his own investments, but he didn't know the extent of Crane's deceit. Mrs. Langley has been kind. She's apologized for not speaking up sooner about my fear that night. I forgive them, but I'll be cautious in future dealings." Sherlock Holmes' smile was faint but genuine. "You are wise beyond your years, mademoiselle. The ties of family and trust, once broken, can be mended, but they require care. You will do well." As they left Clara's room, Hastings turned to his friend. "She's extraordinary, Sherlock Holmes, to face all this and still plan to right the wrongs. It's remarkable." "Indeed," Sherlock Holmes said, his voice soft. "The human spirit, when tested, reveals its strength. Clara Vane will restore her father's legacy, and Blackthorn Manor will heal." They returned to the drawing room, where Sir Reginald and Lady Margaret awaited them. The baronet rose, his face weary but grateful. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes, we owe you everything. Clara is safe, and Crane will face justice. How can we repay you?" Sherlock Holmes waved a hand dismissively. "The truth is payment enough, Sir Reginald. But ensure that Clara has the support she needs. The road ahead will not be easy."
Lady Margaret, her composure restored, spoke up. "We will, monsieur. Clara is family and we'll stand by her. I only wish we'd seen Crane's true nature sooner." Sherlock Holmes' eyes gleamed. "The fault, madame, lies not in your trust, but in Crane's betrayal. Trust is a virtue, but it must be tempered with discernment." As they prepared to depart, Inspector Grayson joined them, his face grim but satisfied. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes, Crane's trial is set for next week. Clara's testimony, along with the evidence, the tonic, the notes, the red glass, will ensure a conviction. You've done fine work." Sherlock Holmes inclined his head. "Thank you, Inspector. The little grey cells, they do their part." As they stepped into the carriage that would take them back to London, Hastings glanced back at Blackthorn Manor, its stone facade now bathed in sunlight. "Sherlock Holmes," he said, "this case, it's more than just a mystery solved. It's about family, trust, and the strength too."
I'll never forget it. Sherlock Holmes's eyes twinkled as he adjusted his hat.
Nor should you, mon ami. Each case teaches us something of the human heart. Write it well, Hastings, but let the truth speak for itself. The carriage rolled away, leaving Blackthorn Manor behind, its secrets laid bare, and its future brighter. Hastings knew that the echoes of this case, the Blood-Red Specter, would resonate long after they returned to the bustle of London, where new puzzles awaited the genius of Sherlock Holmes. Chapter 14. The Restoration of Order. The late afternoon sun bathed Blackthorn Manor in a golden glow, its rays filtering through the ancient oaks that lined the estate, casting dappled shadows across the gravel drive. The oppressive fog that had clung to the manor for days was gone, replaced by a crisp clarity that seemed to mirror the resolution of the mysteries surrounding Miss Clara Vane's disappearance. The household, though still shaken by Dr. Percival Crane's betrayal, was beginning to find its footing, the ties of family and trust slowly knitting back together under the weight of truth. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the faithful chronicler, sat in the drawing room, his notebook filled with the details of the case, his heart lifted by the prospect of healing for those within the manor's walls. Sherlock Holmes stood by the tall windows, his small, immaculate figure a picture of serene authority. His hands were clasped behind his back, his grey eyes scanning the gardens where the yew tree stood, no longer a spectre of dread, but a symbol of the truth uncovered. His expression was one of quiet satisfaction, tempered by the philosophical musings that often followed the resolution of a case. "Hastings," he said, his voice low and precise, "the restoration of order is the true purpose of our work. A mystery once solved does not merely end a crime. It restores balance to those lives disrupted by deceit. Blackthorn Manor is no longer a prison of secrets, but a home once more." Hastings looked up, his pen poised. "You're right, Sherlock Holmes. Clara's strength, the Vane's resolve, it's as if the manor itself is breathing again. But there's still so much to mend. How do they move forward after such a betrayal?" Sherlock Holmes's moustache twitched faintly, a sign of his contemplative mood. "They move forward, mon ami, by embracing the truth and rebuilding trust. Clara Vane, with her courage, will lead them. But let us see how the household fares before we depart, to ensure the order is truly restored." They were interrupted by the arrival of Edmund Vane, his usual sullen demeanour softened by a newfound openness. His eyes, though tired, held a spark of determination, and he carried a small bundle of papers. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes," he said, his voice steady, "I've been speaking with Clara. She's shared the documents she found. Father's papers, the ones showing Crane's fraud." I want to help her. I should have done more before.
Sherlock Holmes regarded him with approval. "Monsieur Edmund, your willingness to act now speaks to your character. The papers, they will aid in restoring your uncle's legacy." Edmund nodded, his jaw set. "Yes. Clara and I are meeting with the solicitors tomorrow. We'll ensure every penny Crane stole is accounted for. Father's promised to oversee the process, and Mother's writing to our contacts in London to secure honest advisers." Sherlock Holmes's eyes gleamed. "A commendable plan, monsieur. And your relationship with Clara, has it healed?" Edmund's expression softened. We talked this morning, properly, for the first time in months. I was angry with her for pushing into the estate matters, thinking it wasn't her place. I was wrong. She's stronger than any of us realized, and I'll stand by her now. Hastings, moved by the young man's sincerity, spoke up. That's admirable, Edmund. Family is everything, and it's clear you and Clara will make things right. Sherlock Holmes inclined his head. Indeed, Hastings, the ties of family, when tested, reveal their true strength. Monsieur Edmund, you have my respect. As Edmund left, Lady Margaret entered, her regal bearing softened by a rare vulnerability. Monsieur Sherlock Holmes, she said, her voice low, I owe you an apology. I suspected Crane's influence over Clara was unhealthy, but I dismissed it as her nerves. I failed her. Sherlock Holmes's tone was gentle but firm. Madame, your fault was in trusting a friend, not in failing Clara. Trust, when betrayed, wounds deeply, but your support for her now will mend those wounds. She spoke highly of you today. Lady Margaret's eyes glistened, but she held her composure. Thank you, monsieur. I've written to my sister in London. She's a barrister and will assist Clara with the legal matters. Will ensure Crane's crimes are fully exposed. Sherlock Holmes nodded. A wise course, madame. The truth, once brought to light, is a powerful ally. As Lady Margaret departed, Mr. and Mrs. Langley approached, their faces a mixture of shame and gratitude. Mr. Langley cleared his throat, his usual bluster subdued. Monsieur Sherlock Holmes, we've caused trouble, I know. Covering those debts, it was wrong, even if I meant to protect the family. I've told Clara everything, and I'll cooperate with her solicitors. Mrs. Langley's voice trembled as she added, I should have spoken up about Clara's fear that night. I'll never forgive myself for staying silent. Sherlock Holmes's expression was kind but unyielding. Madame, your silence delayed the truth. But your honesty last night helped.
Hastings turned to Sherlock Holmes, his voice soft. They're all coming together, Sherlock Holmes. Clara's at the heart of it. But your work, your clarity, made it possible. Sherlock Holmes adjusted his cuffs with meticulous care. The little grey cells, Hastings, they see the path to order. But it is Clara's courage that will pave it. Let us visit her once more before we leave. They found Clara in the conservatory, surrounded by blooming orchids, a notebook in her lap as she jotted down plans for the estate. Her face, though still pale, was alight with purpose. Monsieur Sherlock Holmes, she said, rising to greet them. I am making a list of actions, legal, financial, everything. I want to honor my father's memory, and I have you to thank for giving me the chance. Sherlock Holmes's smile was faint but genuine. Mademoiselle, your resolve is your own. I merely cleared the fog. What are your plans? Clara's eyes sparkled with determination. I'll meet with the solicitors tomorrow, with Edmund and Sir Reginald's support. We'll audit the estate, recover what Crane stole, and set up a trust to protect it. I also want to start a fund for the village school. Father always cared about education. Sherlock Holmes inclined his head. A noble vision, mademoiselle. You will do great things. As they left the conservatory, Hastings glanced at his friend. She's remarkable, Sherlock Holmes. The manor, the family, they're finding their way because of her, and because of you. Sherlock Holmes's eyes twinkled. The credit, Hastings, belongs to the truth. I am but its servant. Come, our carriage awaits. London calls, and with it, new puzzles. They stepped into the sunlight, the manor's stone facade glowing warmly behind them. As the carriage rolled away, Hastings looked back, the yew tree a distant silhouette. The Blood-Red Specter, he murmured. A case of shadows and light, Sherlock Holmes. I'll write it exactly as it happened. Sherlock Holmes leaned back, his expression serene. Do so, mon ami. But let the story speak of courage and truth, for they are the true heroes of Blackthorn Manor. The carriage carried them toward London, the echoes of the case fading into the promise of new adventures, where the genius of Sherlock Holmes would once again illuminate the darkness. Chapter 15. The Departure. The sun dipped low over the rolling hills of Kent, casting a warm amber glow across the grounds of Blackthorn Manor. The estate, so recently shrouded in fog and secrecy, now stood bathed in the gentle light of late afternoon, its ancient stones seeming to exhale the last remnants of the darkness that had gripped it. The resolution of Miss Clara Vane's disappearance and the unmasking of Dr. Percival Crane's treachery had restored a fragile harmony to the household, and the air was filled with the quiet promise of renewal. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the devoted chronicler, stood by the manor's grand entrance, his suitcase at his side, his heart full of the bittersweet satisfaction that came with the close of a case. Sherlock Holmes, impeccable as ever in his tailored overcoat, adjusted his hat with meticulous care, his gray eyes scanning the horizon. The carriage that would carry them back to London waited on the gravel drive, its horses pawing restlessly. His small, precise figure radiated a calm authority, but there was a reflective quality to his demeanor, a sign that the case of the Blood-Red Specter had left its mark, even on the indomitable detective. "Hastings," Sherlock Holmes said, his voice low and accented. "The mystery is solved, the truth revealed, and order restored. Yet each case leaves behind a lesson, a glimpse into the complexities of the human heart. Blackthorn Manor will heal, but it is the courage of Clara Vane that will shape its future." Hastings nodded, his notebook tucked securely in his pocket, its pages filled with the details of their extraordinary adventure. "You're right, Sherlock Holmes. Clara's strength, the family's resolve, it's more than just a solved mystery. It's a story of redemption. But I can't help wondering, how do you move on to the next case so easily, knowing the weight of what we've seen?" Sherlock Holmes's mustache twitched faintly, a rare smile softening his features. "The little gray cells, mon ami, they thrive on the pursuit of truth. Each case is a puzzle, and when it is solved, I am content to leave it behind, knowing justice has been served. But come, let us bid farewell to the Vanes." The household gathered in the great hall to see them off. Sir Reginald Vane, his face weary but grateful, stepped forward, his hand extended. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes, Captain Hastings, words cannot express our gratitude. You've saved Clara and restored our family's honor. Blackthorn Manor is forever in your debt." Sherlock Holmes shook his hand, his expression serene. "Sir Reginald, the debt is paid by the truth. Support Clara in her endeavors, and the manor will thrive." Lady Margaret, her regal poise now tempered with warmth, approached. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes, you've shown us the value of discernment. We were blind to Crane's deceit, but will not make that mistake again. Clara is already planning her work with the solicitors, and will stand by her." Sherlock Holmes inclined his head. "Madame, your resolve strengthens her. Trust, when rebuilt with care, is stronger than before." Edmund Vane, his sullen demeanor replaced by a quiet determination, spoke next. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes, I was wrong to keep silent about Clara's inquiries. I've learned from this, and I'll help her rebuild what Crane stole. Thank you for showing me what loyalty means." Sherlock Holmes' eyes gleamed. "Monsieur Edmund,"
Herself appeared, supported by Ellen, her face still pale but radiant with purpose. She approached Sherlock Holmes, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes, Captain Hastings, you've given me more than my life. You've given me the chance to honor my father's memory. I'm leaving for London tomorrow to meet the solicitors, and I'll ensure Crane's crimes are fully exposed." Sherlock Holmes took her hand gently. "Mademoiselle Clara, your courage is a beacon. The papers you found, the strength you showed, They will shape a legacy of truth. If you ever need assistance, my door in London is open." Clara smiled, a tear escaping. "Thank you, monsieur. I'll never forget you." Mr. and Mrs. Langley stood at the edge of the group, their faces a mixture of shame and relief. Mr. Langley cleared his throat. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes, I was wrong to hide the debts. I've promised Clara full transparency, and I'll work with her to set things right." Mrs. Langley added softly, "I'll always regret my silence that night. But your clarity, Monsieur Sherlock Holmes, showed me the importance of speaking out. We'll support Clara however we can." Sherlock Holmes nodded. "Your candor now, Monsieur and Madame Langley, is a step towards redemption. Continue on that path." As the farewells concluded, Inspector Grayson approached, his gruff demeanor softened by respect. "Monsieur Sherlock Holmes, you've done what I couldn't. Crane's trial will be swift, thanks to your evidence and Clara's testimony. You're a remarkable man." Sherlock Holmes waved a hand dismissively. "The little grey cells, Inspector, they merely see what others overlook. Keep us informed of the trial's outcome." With final goodbyes exchanged, Sherlock Holmes and Hastings stepped into the carriage, the manor's grand facade receding as they rolled down the drive. The yew tree, once a symbol of dread, stood tall in the fading light, its branches swaying gently as if bidding them farewell. Hastings glanced at his friend, his voice quiet. "Sherlock Holmes, this case, it's one for the books. The Blood-Red Specter, the courage of Clara, the betrayal of Crane. It's a story of shadows and light, just as you said." Sherlock Holmes leaned back, his eyes half closed, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Write it well, Hastings, but let it be a story of truth, not embellishment. The world has enough shadows. It is the light of reason that endures." The carriage rattled on towards London, the countryside unfolding in a blur of green and gold. Hastings clutched his notebook, the weight of the case settling into his memory. The Blood-Red Specter was no more, its mystery solved by the genius of Sherlock Holmes, whose little grey
Lessons of trust, courage, and redemption would linger in his heart, a testament to the enduring brilliance of his remarkable friend.